Yes, this is Stories of the Dream Palace. So, whilst we talk of the future of the cinema exhibition industry, we also talk of the past and the stories that came before us, and the people who attended cinemas, and the importance of those stories to our understanding of what cinema is and our understanding of what the future of cinema might be. So, to discuss this topic, I'm delighted to be joined. I just ploughed on, sorry. I'm delighted to be joined, Rosie Hickey from the Strand Arts Centre in Belfast. Full disclosure, that's 5 minutes from my house. And Ian Francis from Flatpack Festival. And we're going to talk about two projects that they've been doing over the last couple of years. Is that fair?
A year.
A year, yeah.
2 years.
2 years. And so first, I suppose maybe you should introduce yourselves and what you've been doing for the last while. So.
Thank you. So I'm Rosie Hickey. I'm Heritage Officer at the Strand Arts Centre, formerly known as the Strand Cinema. And I manage a really lovely heritage project called Strand Stories, which is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And the aim of the project is really to record and cherish and promote the rich heritage of the Strand. So I'll just very briefly kind of set a bit of context as to the Strand, and then I'll go into the project. Mm-hmm. So the Strand, it first opened its doors on the 7th of December 1935, so it's going to be celebrating its 87th birthday soon. It was designed by a prolific local cinema architect called John McBride Neal. It was built in 1935, whenever cinema was really booming in Belfast. In fact, by the late 30s, the city of Belfast alone had over 40 cinemas. The Strand itself, it was a single-screen picture house. It seated 1,170 people. It's quite important to note it was located in East Belfast in quite close proximity to the shipyards, which in the 30s was a really important industry for Belfast. So the Strand Stories project, it was a lovely project to be part of. It had quite a few different outputs. So the kind of key component of the project was oral history interviewing. So there were an awful lot of anecdotes all about the Strand, but we wanted to kind of formally record them and gather them up. And I think I fast forwarded actually. I need to go back. Back to the 30s, single screen picture house did immensely well, very popular. But then of course, as we all know, there was the decline of cinema. An awful lot of cinemas in Belfast closed their doors in Belfast. By the 80s, even the Strand, it was at high risk of being demolished, but it was taken over and it was converted to a variety theatre by a local businessman. We had the likes of the Drifters, we had the Nolans.
Little and large.
Little and large. And just to kind of set the context, we were a variety theatre between 84 and 87, and that's whenever the Troubles was, very bad. So getting the Drifters over from the States to, a venue in East Belfast, that was a major coup. However, the variety theatre, it was very difficult to run, wasn't very sustainable. There was something of a rebirth of cinema in the late 80s. So the Strand, it was carved up into a 4-screen cinema. It did very well. There was queues around the block to get in. But then, again, there was another decline of cinema in the 90s and 2000s. And the Strand became an arts centre. So we're now a charity, a not-for-profit charity, an arts centre. Yes, so now I can go back to the Strand Stories project. Yes, so we had a number of outputs. We needed to record memories and stories of the project. We put together a website, strandstoriesbelfast.com. Please go and visit it. We put together education packs for kids. We developed workshops. So we're trying to teach people in the local area, how to do oral history interviews, and so everyone can kind of gather up all these memories. and I think I've talked for quite a while.
Do you want to show the film that gives a taste of the project?
Yeah, so we've also produced a number of films, including one which we're going to show now. So if Laura's about,
The screen has gone dark.
So this showcases some of the interviews we've done. There should be some. There should be. Oh, no, there should be audio, interview audio.
Bear with us.
So this film, it stitches together kind of archive footage, contemporary footage, with some of the oral history interviews that I've conducted. Hopefully this will work. No, there should be voice.
Can we come back to it at the end as well?
Can we,
Yeah.
Can we just sort of, can we roll it? Or do you want to test it later?
If we can come back to it at the end, I'll go.
All right, okay. Well, we've got the sense of the Strand Stories. So just before we move to Wonderland project, Ian's, what was the overall objective behind Strand Stories?
Yeah, so it was to raise awareness of the rich heritage of this amazing building. So now it is actually the last operational 1930s cinema in not just Belfast, but in all of Northern Ireland. So this is the only one we have left. And we have an operational 35mm projector. You know, we have original features from the 1930s. And, you know, the Strand is one of those places you can go into, you can sit in the seats, especially in the front stalls, and you can have the same experience as someone going in the 1930s. In the 1940s, then they would have been watching their newsreels. Now we're maybe watching a blockbuster, but it's so it's just to raise awareness of that heritage and also to gather up more information, more memories. Because as I was saying to you earlier, Hugh, you know, there's a number of people I chatted to who actually were at the opening of the Strand, you know, in 1935, and who attended screenings throughout the 30s. And since I've interviewed them, you know, they've since died. And so I feel like it was a privilege, it's an honour for me to have recorded those memories.
So it's collected those memories.
Yeah.
Ian, tell us about Wonderland and the project in Birmingham.
So, yeah, it's similar in some ways to Strand Stories, although we're trying to do a whole city, so it's slightly crazy. We're talking 100+ cinemas, and each of those venues has its own rich history, which is, the more you get into it, the more you realise what a rich kind of repository each venue is. So we were basically given the opportunity to pitch a project for the Birmingham 22 Festival as part of the Commonwealth Games, and we wanted to do something that was kind of universal and citywide, I suppose, because Birmingham has a tendency to show off its city centre, and you know, we've done various bits and bobs, little aspects of the cinema history of the city, but not really on this scale before. And because we had a reasonable budget, we thought we'd be ambitious, and I think that in particular those areas where you see the map, we created a physical map for this exhibition, and you can see where the really concentrated bits of cinema culture were, and they're working class areas, not surprisingly similar with Belfast, I would imagine. So they tell you an awful lot, not just about cinema, but about communities and leisure and
How
design and architecture, and how people lived, and all of that kind of stuff. And so we got it off the ground. The plan was to do an online resource, an exhibition, a whole series of events, and like with Strand Stories, gather a bunch of oral histories. And the exhibition took a much bigger part of the project than initially planned, because it became part of the reopening of Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, which was back just for the 6 months of the Commonwealth Games cultural programme. And that consumed a lot of resources, but it was also fantastic in terms of reaching people, because we were right next to one of the main live sites, and we had 400,000 people over the course of.
Those are big numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the atmosphere in the show was just incredible, because everyone does have their own cinema story, I guess,
Yeah.
and whatever age. So it wasn't. We had a lot of international visitors for whom it meant something, even though it was a Birmingham story. A lot of kids who were getting their heads around the fact that cinemas used to have 2,000 seats back in the day. They used to 100 seats. Multiplexes choosing from 8 different things, but everyone was watching the same thing, like 2,000 people. So it's a very different experience. I don't know if we're going to be able to see the video if the audio is tricky, but one of the things in there, we managed to document this model of the Odeon New Street in Birmingham city centre. This guy spent 28 years building a scale replica of the Odeon New Street. Ridiculous detail, down to loo rolls and tip-up seats. And initially we were going to display this thing, but it was so fragile and so full of dodgy wiring. And basically the technical people at the museum said, you can bring it in, but you have to cut the plug off first, because it's a massive fire risk. So we just made a film of it instead and photographed it inside and out. And that really tells you a lot about the project in one object, not just the scale and the opulence of these spaces, but also the obsession that they generated amongst people, like people who worked in cinemas, but also people who attended them. A recurring theme among people that we interview and talk to is, even if they haven't worked in cinema for donkey's years, they still go on about it. And we, being people who work in cinema ourselves, will recognise this, and it's not just a job; it's a sort of passion and a vocation.
Well, I was going to ask. I don't think we're going to be able to show the films, but maybe we could share them with delegates later on. But I think that it's very interesting, the emotional connection that cinema has, and the emotional connection that communities have to their cinemas. When you were working with the Strand community, I mean, it's a hugely changed community than it was in 1935, just in terms of the demographics around that period, that bit of East Belfast. What was the reaction? Was it a positive reaction to the idea of the Strand? Yeah, I'm talking about it.
Yeah, so it was a really positive reaction. So I went out to kind of care homes, I went out to schools, and across the generations, it was a really positive reaction to the Strand. What came across quite strongly was, a sense of, within the local community anyway, a real sense of ownership and pride and a real fondness for the Strand. So it was really lovely, from wee kids up to more senior people. So there's a real attachment to the Strand, and that really came across.
Yeah, I mean, it's a living, breathing cinema, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, in Birmingham, you're talking about a lot of cinemas that have disappeared. Did communities come out? Did they connect? Did they still have that ownership, even though things weren't there anymore?
Completely. Yeah, like we did a walk of cinemas in Balsall Heath, Sparkbrook, a particular area of Birmingham where South Asian cinema was massive. There were like 6 or 7 cinemas that survived long after a lot of others were closing down, just because you had a whole bunch of businessmen who were repurposing them as almost community spaces as well as film venues. And most of them are not there anymore. So we were basically doing a walking tour of empty patches of land, but the people came along, people on the walk had memories of those spaces, and they still navigate by them. I think they've become really geographically significant as landmarks in people's heads. And a lot of the oral histories, a lot of the conversations were about the physical space and the journey to get to the cinema and all of that kind of stuff. You'd think you're in the dark, you're just watching a film, does it really matter where you are? But actually, if you think about your own film memories, a lot of them are tied to specific spaces. And how you approach them, and the surrounding areas, and places you went for a drink afterwards or tea before. Exactly, the whole ritual and who you were with. And we had a woman who kept a diary of all their cinema experiences. They were basically like little mini Twitter length reviews with the ticket stub and a note of who she went with each time. And loads of that kind of stuff that came through. It was it's part of the fabric of people's lives. But I think for us, like the migrant stories were particularly rich because it was about a connection with home as well as a community space for a whole community that didn't really have community spaces other than cinemas. And so thus far, a lot of the history of cinema tends to be a kind of nostalgic 30s, 40s, golden age thing that leaves aside the 60s and 70s and 80s and the more kind of interesting, I suppose, diverse stories. So that was a big part of it for us, because you look at older 80s histories of Birmingham cinema, and there's a phrase, gone Asian. You talk about a cinema that's gone Asian, and it might as well have been converted to bingo or whatever. There's no idea, there's no sense of what they showed or who ran it or whatever. So that was, for us, that was part of it, really. Was trying to fill in some of those gaps.
I think, I mean, to me, what's most interesting about these kind of projects is what they say about social history and what they reflect about the trends of the time and things like that. I mean, certainly, I know, Sam Manning's up there in the audience, in terms of the Troubles in Belfast and what cinema meant during that period, but also how it disappeared and what happened and stuff. I don't think the Strand was ever firebombed, was it?
I think there was a firebomb in the foyer, but didn't do too much damage.
Okay. I mean, did people talk about cinema during the Troubles and things?
Yeah, there's actually a lovely quote that was in the film, but I'll try to paraphrase it now. So it was a woman who grew up in the Troubles, and she said, growing up in Belfast in the 1970s, it was a bit grim, and you very much saw life is just kind of grey. People just had black and white TV. She saw life grey, but when you went to the cinema, you saw life in full colour. And it's a really powerful quote, and I haven't done it justice. But there's something about just seeing the news, black and white, it was all very grim. And when you went to the cinema, that was a form of escapism. It was a form by which people navigated the Troubles and were transported, to another place, went on a journey.
So they were almost safe spaces to a certain extent.
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting because I've talked to a lot of people, and I've said, during the Troubles, the idea of going into a cinema with, 1,000 other people, an auditorium full of strangers, was that not slightly a hairy thing to do? Yeah. But people across the board, people have said, no, that never came into my mind, and very much came across that cinemas were regarded as a shared space. And, interestingly, some cinemas were bombed, but people still had that feeling of, no, the cinema is safe. And it's interesting, I think just from doing a lot of interviews, I find that cinema history, it can be viewed as a portal, a way of kind of learning about life in the past. And, I have talked to people, and they talk about cinema stories, but they also talk about kind of cinema going as ways of navigating things like the Troubles, even things like the Second World War. And talking to people, talking about cinema going often tells you about kind of working conditions, living conditions. It tells you about what people enjoyed, what people valued. And especially for kids, learning about history in that way, it's quite relatable. So we're encouraging kids to kind of talk to their grandparents about, what was your experience, and they can relate it. Yeah,
that intergenerational thing is quite interesting. I was going to ask a question just about, we often see ourselves as an industry in crisis. And when you talk to people and you do oral history, the importance of cinema to people's lives is so obvious. Do you think that these projects reignite a kind of passion for cinema, or, well, maybe passion for cinema is the wrong word, but they remind people of the importance of cinema in their community? Is that something that happens during projects like this? I suppose the question I'm asking is, do these people who engage with these projects, are they audiences? Are they future audiences further down the line?
Yeah, one of the quotes on the video, which we'll share a link to, that there's an audience, there's a visitor to the exhibition who kind of ends going, I really should go to the cinema more often. Kind of thing. It's that is definitely something that people come away with, and we didn't want it just to be an elegy for the past. You know, it's not a dead thing. There's a section of the exhibition, and we've got a website as well, which is all about what's happening now. It's not a kind of, it's not just packaging up the past. But
because he's always that worried, but just become a nostalgic exercise.
Yeah, but I think with COVID in particular, the project changed quite a lot because we all thought about what it meant to be in the dark with a bunch of strangers watching a film, and it became, you know, people definitely had their fill of Netflix, and they're sort of confronted what cinema meant to them, I suppose.
Yeah, so seeing an exhibition like this actually allows them to realise the scope and the size of what it was.
Yeah. But and in terms of whether that leads you to audiences, I definitely think so. That's part of the aim for us, is that it underpins what we do as an organisation, particularly with communities in different parts of Birmingham where we don't get so many audiences for, say, the festival. It's a really good conversation starter to go to a particular area and say, remember what this building used to be, kind of thing, whether it's schools work or intergenerational or whatever.
The Strand is obviously going through fundraising to restore, rebuild.
Not rebuild.
No.
We're not rebuilding it.
No, what's the word?
Kind of refurbishing
Refurbish it. That's it.
So at the minute, you know, it's an old building, and there's parts of it which need upgraded. And one of the major issues is accessibility. So there's only one out of the 4 screens that has level access. So there's things that need to be kind of upgraded.
So does a project like this help? And I suppose, does it help you talk to funders?
So it helps us talk to funders. You know, all the Strand stories we've collected, they're almost like evidence. They're, you know, evidence of the value of the Strand socially and architecturally to people. And also, a project like this is really important because it underlines, you know, what people value most and what needs protected. You know, it helps us work out, okay, you know, the texture of the walls is something that people value. We need to keep that, or, you know, so it helps us kind of feed into the design of the new project.
One of the best things about the Strand is that it has a clock. It's the only cinema I've ever seen with a clock on the wall. Is that a normal thing? Do cinemas have clocks on the wall? I've never seen that before. Maybe it was, I often think it's because the shipyard workers were probably like getting away from work, were meant to be in work, and so they had to keep an eye on the time during or something like that. I don't know. Anyway.
There's a strange story about that.
There is? Right, okay.
Apparently, I just think it was maybe hung the wrong way round, but apparently the clock goes backwards.
Right.
Okay. Well, it now doesn't work at all, but apparently in the 80s it went backwards.
Well, didn't so much in the 80s go backwards. Let's go to slides. Sally, have you any slides for us?
I have some Slidos, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, she says dropping them on the floor. A couple of really nice ones. Do you feel that built cinema heritage should be given as much importance as screen archive material, as it's all part of the history of our industry?
That's a tricky one. I mean, obviously film archives need a lot of resources. I don't want to be plundering their limited budgets, but I do think it's important, definitely, just because of that local buy-in, the buy-in you get from ordinary people, I suppose, because they mean an awful lot. Obviously, the Cinema Theatre Association has been doing a lot around buildings at risk for years, and that's still happening, and it's a difficult case to make sometimes if you've got a building that it's very hard to do anything else with it. You know, they're massive spaces, they're quite difficult to repurpose. Bingo is not what it was, thanks to smoking ban and various other reasons. And we have a lot to thank Bingo for, I think, for keeping a lot of these buildings going. But
and churches, obviously, as well.
Yeah. But I think as much in terms of raising awareness and for us, definitely looking at some of these spaces and the way that they're mouldering away, and they've still got amazing artefacts inside them, some of these places that are just being left to decline. There's definitely an important resource there.
I mean, I suppose that sort of balance between the importance of film archive, and obviously it is very important, but I think if we want to make a case for the future of cinema, and these places in our communities, and the importance of them. And I think this story, but also I think projects like yours are so important in terms of it's a really ephemeral experience going to cinema, and it's something that historians and the canon, or whatever you want to call it, is really sort of treated with a bit of disdain. But actually, it's so important. I mean, if you engage with the Strand Stories of Wonderland, these people's lives, cinema is so important to their lives, and recording that and having that there for future generations to understand and research is so important. So I think it is key.
Yeah. Have you learned anything about the history of these cinemas that we could apply to contemporary situations?
Don't split into 4 screens.
You were talking about a state of crisis, so it's just nice to be reminded that cinema was always in crisis. And, it was like when talkies came, it was a kind of existential threat, and just all these different stages. People have been talking about the death of cinema since the 1910s and 20s.
I guess the Strand is quite a nice example of it's evolved over the years. Whether correctly or not. It started off as a single screen picture house. It took on another guise as a 4-screen multiplex. It was a variety theatre, so it kind of adapted with the times, but yet it never lost its heart. It hasn't totally refurbished. You can still go in and have an image in your head of what it would have felt like in the 1930s. So yeah, that idea of balancing evolution but kind of maintaining the heritage value of it.
And the importance of escape and experience. That's what people talk about all the time, about going somewhere special. So not multiplexes, but they don't come out of our exhibition particularly well in sort of relation to some of the other eras of cinema, I suppose, and that rediscovering that sense of event and the uniqueness seems to be really key.
Yeah, a lot of people talked about the kind of spectacle of it all, and it was like going to a palace. I think the title of this session is Dream Palace, is it? But people, refer to it as a picture palace, and especially like in the 30s, life was again a bit grim outside. People didn't have central heating. People didn't have inside toilets. People didn't have carpet. But coming into the cinema, it was literally like coming into a palace. And even now, it should be a place of comfort and luxury and heating on.
Yes, it plays a role. I suppose it's also worth thinking that in 100 years, people will be valuing and remembering all the work that you hold all the time. So it's kind of adding on to that generation. Sorry, next one.
Yeah, ready? Have you found it difficult getting younger audiences, so under 25s, engaged with the archival film projects that you've been running?
I've actually been really pleasantly surprised by the engagement with younger audiences. So within Strand Stories, I've developed an education pack for like P7. So I don't know if you have P7 here, but it's kind of 11-year-old kids. I've developed loads of activity trails, and it actually, it sounds ridiculous, but it kind of gladdens my heart to see little 5 and 6-year-olds going around, trying to, find things in the Strand and trying to find details and dates. And we printed loads of stickers, and they have a great time. We have a mind. Well, from 1949 to about 1977, we had an ABC Miners Club in the Strand, and we've tried to kind of revive that now. So we have free films on a Saturday. Unlike our old Miners Club, parents are allowed.
And there's no smoking.
And there's no smoking. But I've actually been really pleasantly surprised with the reaction from kids.
Yeah, same. I love it. And we designed the exhibition deliberately so that there was a kind of, for the nerds who want to read every label and get into the detail and tell you when you've got the capacity of a venue wrong, all of that kind of stuff, that's covered. But there was also a light up map in the middle of the room that kids gravitated towards. They love things that light up, and it shows you basically all the cinemas in 1915, 1940, 1984 at the very low point, and then 2022. And that was just mind-blowing to kids to know that there were 100+ cinemas in their city, and they can position themselves in the map and go, oh wow, there was like 5 cinemas and just
within walking
distance
distance
from my house, kind of thing. And into film, we've done some some schools resources around the exhibition, and I do think it has loads of potential. And I remember BFI Education did some stuff around this, like reminiscence boxes and stuff years ago, and I would strongly recommend it. Even what we're talking about is a large-scale heritage project, but you could definitely do something small-scale with schools just around cinema history, particularly if you've got a school that has a cinema near them that's like specific to them. It's a really good local history project.
Did you publish a book? Or will you be publishing a book?
Yeah, well, kind of. A magazine, actually, that's a good opportunity. I will dig out a notepad and people can come and scribble addresses on it. That might be a bit of an analogue way of doing it, but we're currently finishing off Flatpack always does books, so apologies for that. But we got some amazing stories. We interviewed the oldest living cinema organist, Eric Turland, who's 98, about his experiences. And yeah, the Wonderland magazine will hopefully be done by the end of the year. That's like the last thing. So come and see me and give me your address if you want a copy.
2 more, is that okay?
Yeah, we've got time.
We've got 2 more, and then we might try and play those films.
Yeah, if we can try
Just
film
to see. We'll try. One for Rosie. How does the Strand envisage integrating the heritage work you've done with any redevelopment plans for the Arts Centre?
Yeah, so heritage, we imagine, will be fused. It will be totally integrated in future work that we're going to do. So even coming here today, like one of the things that we have thought about doing in a future refurb is to kind of glaze one of the projection boxes like you've done here, so that you can see the inner workings of the cinema. You can see the operational 35mm projector. You can see on display the heritage workings of the building. So yes, very much heritage will be at the heart. Obviously, we need to balance it, as I said, with things like accessibility. But yeah, heritage will be very dominant.
I suppose that this is strategic importance because it's the last 1935 cinema as well.
Yeah.
So it sort of it gives you a USB.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay. Do we try?
Go for it.
should
Should
we
we go
try?
for the films?
Yeah. Are you going to ask the last question whilst you try? Or are they going straight in?
You can.
Let's see if it works.
Let's see if it
Okay.
works, and then we can
And
have
then
a
otherwise
question.
just
If not, yeah. There we go.
Doesn't seem to be any sound.
No
No.
sound at all there.
Oh. Oh.
Oh.
Oh no. Oh, it's starting
No,
again. Maybe if you stop and then restart. Oh. So that guy talking at the start, he's a guy called Perry. He's now 99. He was at the opening. His dad was apparently city surveyor. And he also happens to be a photographer, so he's got this amazing collection of photographs.
Not working at all there.
So near. Oh no.
Sorry, everyone. Well, we will make an effort to try to share the films, but we have one last question. Do you want to give one last question?
Yeah, let's have one last question. So are cinemas shaped by their patrons, or are cinemas shape their patrons?
I think they are both shaped. I think both. I think the Strand is shaped by people, but I think people can be shaped and influenced by the Strand. Yes.
Pretty deep.
It's
I have
pretty
been.
deep.
I have been.
Yeah. Yeah, I think both. I think it's what do you think?
Yeah, that is
It's quite a deep
a cosmic question,
Yeah.
but I mean, they definitely are, and people leave their mark on a place in bad ways and good, as you know, if you run a cinema. But yeah, we really didn't want it just to be about buildings. You know, the buildings are important, but it's really what happened inside them that makes these places special, and the people who worked in them, people who attended them. And it was clear from talking to people, I mean, we were interested in anyway, so we were like, oh, maybe this is just a thing that we're interested in because we do it ourselves, we show films, and we're trying to justify this job of showing films and go, look, loads of other people do it as well. But actually it really resonated with people, and I think they were interested in the projectionists and the box office and all that kind of stuff, but they were really interested in the audience stories. And, just as a plug for our website too, we've started mapping all of these spaces, and we've realised we've bitten off way more than we could chew, but we've got about 25 Birmingham cinemas at Wonderland, birmingham.co.uk if you're interested, and hopefully in a couple of years we'll have 150. We'll see how it goes.
Map them all out.
Yeah.
Great. That's all the slides. We're all done. I'll just wrap up, and then you can take us into the close down. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along to. I hope cinema heritage and built cinema heritage is a growing area, and something that in all venues, you know, you can look at and tell audiences what the history of your venue is, be it short or 135 years old. But most of all, thank you for you, and thank you to Ian and Rosie for coming along today, and good luck with future projects.
Thank you very much. We're done. Well done, everyone. You made it to the end. So thank you very much to the panel. Sorry about the videos. We will try and share those. So we are now going to celebrate St Andrew's Day at the V&A. So if you, whenever you're ready, walk fairly slowly because it opens at 6. So don't run, but walk along the route to the V&A, and we're going to be having a reception there. You should see some of our staff along the route. So if you are getting a bit lost, look for a couple of people in high vis and they'll point you in the right direction. For those of you who aren't joining us, and for everybody else anyway, we start tomorrow at 9:30 with a conversation with the filmmakers of Winners, and that'll be in this screen. We open for 9 o'clock for coffee. At home, we'll be live at 9:30. So we'll see you at the V&A, or we'll see you in the morning. Thank you.